Good morning. The Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on wildland firefighter workforce reforms. Under Committee Rule 4, subparagraph F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member or their designees. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or by the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. As described in the notice, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Members physically present should provide a hard copy for staff to distribute by email. Additionally, please note that as with in-person meetings, members are responsible for their own microphones. As with our in-person meetings, members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Pursuant to Committee Rule 3, subparagraph L, and the latest guidance from the attending physician, anyone present in the hearing room today must wear a mask covering their mouth and nose. It's my hope that with everyone's cooperation, we can protect the safety of members and staff and the families they return to at home. The committee also has masks available for any member who may need one. Without objection, Representative Zoe Lofgren of California, Representative Jared Huffman of California, and Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming are authorized to question the witnesses in today's hearing. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff as soon as possible. I'll go ahead and proceed with my opening statement and want to welcome everyone for attending this important hearing today for the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands legislative hearing on wildland firefighter workforce reforms. As we all know, wildfires are an all lands issue that does not recognize federal, state, or private boundary. Aid and other agreements, federal, state, and local firefighters are successful at initially suppressing 98% of wildfires. However, wildfires today are nearly a year-round risk, burning larger areas at higher intensity, and this is only projected to increase as the climate continues to warm. Meanwhile, ongoing development in fire-prone areas and decades of fire exclusions are putting more people and properties at risk. While Congress has acted to increase the budget for wildfire suppression, we have neglected to prioritize the well-being of those on the front lines of these climate-driven disasters, our brave federal wildland firefighters. During an active wildfire, we will always prioritize the protection of people and property, but on large wildfires, there is truly no substitute for the vital services, the expertise, and the capacity provided by our federal wildland firefighters. At an April 29th oversight hearing in this subcommittee, many months ago, many of you participated in it, we received testimony covering the many challenges faced by federal wildland firefighters across the country and the need for workforce reforms. My legislation that we are considering today, H.R. 5631, the Tim Hart Wildland Firefighter Classification and Pay Parity Act, introduced with my good colleague and friend, Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming and Representative Katie Porter of California, is a direct byproduct of those efforts. Introduced, as I mentioned, it would officially recognize federal wildland firefighters through a new job series classification and provide for other changes to pay, benefits, and policies intended to help recruit, retain, and modernize the workforce. Also included in today's hearing is legislation introduced by my colleague and chair of the House Administration Committee, Zoe Lofgren of California. I'm pleased to have worked with Representative Lofgren to introduce H.R. 4274, the Wildland Firefighter Fair Pay Act, which would ensure that critical wildfire personnel aren't sidelined or forced to work without full and fair compensation during our worst fire years. In fact, we've successfully advocated and seen a short-term fix on this exact issue signed into law at the end of September as a provision of the Extending Government Funding and Delivering Emergency Assistance Act. Like H.R. 4274, the continuing resolution required a report to Congress on wildfire workforce modernization efforts, and I hope to hear an update today from the administration on how that report might consider some of the broader fire workforce challenges and solutions that we'll be discussing today. Lastly, I want to recognize the Biden administration for their recent efforts in this space, including this summer's announcement of temporary increases in pay and recruit incentives. While it's encouraging to see the administration, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Department of Interior recognize the importance of these actions, I certainly think it speaks to the need for a more enduring and congressional enacted solution, and I look forward to continuing to work towards those ends. Similarly, I'd like to thank the administration for the work they've already done with Congress to see investments in our land management agencies included in infrastructure and reconciliation legislation that's pending before the House. To my colleagues today who may be prepared to argue that this hearing somehow misses the point or it fails to appropriately prioritize forest health or resilience, I just would be remiss if I didn't point out that this subcommittee, under our leadership, has devoted numerous hearings, both legislative and oversight, to related issues this year. We have marked up multiple bills regarding forest health and resiliency and better land management practices, including legislation that I've authored. And I hope that we could all agree on the importance of supporting our federal wildland firefighters and to focus our efforts today on discussing the issues that are before this committee, which are precisely that, giving our federal wildland firefighters a long overdue pay raise and addressing the many other inadequacies in the compensation regime for our federal wildland firefighters. So again, I want to thank my colleagues for joining the hearing. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I certainly look forward to your testimony on these critical issues, and I will yield back the remainder of my time. Ranking Member Fulcher, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Neguse. As our nation's wildfire seasons have grown in both duration and severity, our federal wildland firefighters have been stretched incredibly thin. In addition to the mental and physical toll of fighting longer and more severe fires, better opportunities from state and private firefighting forces have combined to hamper retention and recruitment of federal wildland firefighters. The bills before us today are serious proposals that would address necessary compensation and support services, and I commend Chairman Neguse and Representative Lofgren for their work. I also commend the advocacy and bravery of Michelle Hart, who tragically lost her husband, Tim, as he fought a fire in New Mexico earlier this year. Michelle is joining us today, and I thank her for being here. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that the top workforce reform priorities raised by wildland firefighters, namely increasing pay and reclassifying their title as firefighters instead of technicians, do not fall under the jurisdiction of this committee. In fact, both of the bills before us today have been primarily referred to the House Oversight and Reform Committee. It's perplexing that committee leadership declined to hold hearings on what actually is the subcommittee's jurisdiction, the management of our public lands and forests. While there are very real workforce challenges that demand our attention, we cannot truly address wildland firefighter well-being until we also aggressively increase the pace of scale of management warranted to rein in this historic wildfire crisis. It's undeniable that the primary driver of our wildland firefighter workforce challenge is the enormous buildup of hazardous fuels on too many of our federal lands, which has led to worsening catastrophic wildfire seasons. Forcing our wildland firefighters to fight longer fire seasons filled with increasingly uncontrollable infernos is not sustainable and incredibly unwise. Addressing pay and benefits is important and is equipping our federal land agencies with the tools they need to respond to wildfires, but that alone will not solve the root issue. Don't take my word for it, take the word of Forest Service Chief Randy Moore, who said the following before House Agriculture Committee. We will never hire enough firefighters. We will never buy enough engines or aircrafts to fight those fires. We must actively treat forests. That's what it takes to turn this situation around. We must shift from small-scale treatments to strategic science-based treatments across boundaries. It must start with those places most critically at risk. We must treat 20 million acres over 10 years. Done right in the right places, treatments make a difference. Look no further of where this made a difference than in the Cameron Peak Fire, the largest fire in Colorado's history and located in Chairman Neguse's district. When the fire reached Shambhala Mountain Center, where previous forest thinning projects had been completed, firefighters felt safe enough to battle the blaze. I'd like to enter an article into the record about Mountain Center, which quotes Corey Carson, a firefighter who worked on the Cameron Peak Fire. In the article, Corey discusses how the fire had ballooned to over 100,000 acres by the time it hit the mountain center. Then the fire hit the restored forest. It slowed down. There was less fuel to burn. With the fuel treatment and the firefighters on the ground, we were able to pick up the fire there, Carlson said. It was hugely successful. Looking back, Carlson wouldn't have even ordered his team to set up camp on Shambhala's campus if there hadn't been restoration work done there. We owe it to our federal wildland firefighters and the 134 families that have had to deal with their loved ones not coming home from a fire. Taking care of them means helping them support their families and keeping them safe. Committee Republicans believe in both and won't choose one over the other. I look forward to hearing the testimony today and discussing these important issues with you. Mr. Chairman, thank you again, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Fulcher. Ranking Member Fulcher yields back. Now I'd like to recognize the gentlelady from California, Representative Zoe Lofgren, for her opening remarks.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Chairman Neguse, as well as Chairman Grijalva, for holding this very important hearing on my bill, the Wildland Firefighter Fair Pay Act, and also to your work on the larger issue of the firefighter workforce reforms. We all know that wildfires are consuming an ever larger part of our country, and increasingly more of the nation is in high-risk fire zones. The wildfire season is now nearly year-long in duration. It's worth noting that 2020 was the most active wildfire year on record, with 10.3 million acres burned, exceeding the 2000 to 2010 average by 51%. And this year's wildfire season is going to be similarly destructive. Obviously, we've had a pandemic, and the resources to fight fires have been drained partly by COVID, but also the extended wildfires that have really pushed our emergency response personnel past their limits. In California, most of the fires burning on federal land are on federal land, and the overtime pay cap for federal wildland firefighters is a significant hurdle in attracting and retraining our most experienced firefighters. Lifting the cap is one of the many steps we need to take to guarantee fair pay for responders for their hard work and service for our communities, and to build the kind of federal firefighting workforce that we need to meet the new challenges that we face. As you've mentioned, Chairman Neguse, we did include the waiver for the 2021 calendar year. I want to recognize the leadership that you exhibited to get this done, along with this hardworking committee, but also Representative Josh Harder of California, who played a key role in making that happen. However, as we know, that's important, but not enough. We know that the problem is not going to disappear next year or in subsequent years. We need to create an enduring fix for this, and my bill will help do that. The Department of Interior and Agriculture have told us that as many as 500 positions could have hit the statutory pay gaps in this calendar year, but for the action that we took. And unless we create a fix, impacted individuals will either not be able to respond to the wildfires that we need them to fight, or we'll be asking them to work without pay. It's absolutely not responsible. This bill also directs the Department of Interior and Agriculture to submit a report on the resources, policies, personnel, and structural changes and any other investments they think prudent to support an expanded year-round firefighting workforce. It's the first step, actually, in a paradigm shift in forest management to create longer-term solutions for our firefighters and our communities. Now, I look forward to hearing from the witnesses on the panel about the needs for our wildland firefighters to inform this legislation, and to engaging further with the administration on reforms to ensure that federal employees either supporting or serving as wildland firefighters are appropriately recognized and compensated. And once again, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and Chairman Grijalva for your terrific leadership, as well as the members of the California delegation who have really stepped forward to support a variety of efforts in the fight against wildfires in our state and around the country. And with that, with gratitude, I yield back to you, Chairman Neguse.
Gentlewoman yields back. Thank you, Representative Lofgren, for your leadership as well. The chair will now recognize, I believe, Ranking Member Westerman is with us for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Neguse, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I also want to thank the majority for having witnesses in the committee hearing room and using the audio-visual equipment. It's nice to get back to some form of normalcy here in the committee. I appreciate this hearing today, and it's an opportunity to discuss a bipartisan concern, and that is the compensation of well-being of our brave wildland firefighters. Before I begin my statement, I would like to thank Michelle Hart for making the long journey out here to be with us today. I've got the pleasure of having dinner with Ms. Hart earlier this year, and I still keep a decal like this one. It's a drawing she gave me of Tim in my office. I think that her story is a reminder of why we're all here, to ensure that firefighters like Tim aren't worried about providing for their families, and that those families don't have to experience what Michelle is going through right now. Unfortunately, in the past 10 years, Michelle's reality has been the reality of 134 families of federal wildland firefighters. When I was with Ms. Hart earlier this year, we talked about the short-term and long-term challenges facing our firefighters. I support addressing both. We should be paying our firefighters more, and we should also manage our forest so that we don't have to lose another brave hero like Tim. Think about it this way. Imagine that you worked in a factory that was so dangerous and unsafe that 13 of your co-workers died every year. If the owner of that factory raised the salaries of all the employees, it might temporarily placate the workers, but there would be a national outrage that nothing was being done to fix these unsafe working conditions. Where's the national outrage for the fact that we are sending our firefighters into unwinnable situations year after year? Why do we continue to put our firefighters into harm's way for longer, more severe wildfire seasons without any relief? The answer is not unknown to us. In fact, we know exactly what needs to be done. We need to actively manage our forest, a reality that Democrats on this committee have gone to unbelievable lengths to deny. This is a simple science fact, and it needs to be taken seriously by this committee. Take the bootleg fire in Oregon, for example. That fire, which burned over 400,000 acres and was so intense it created its own weather system, was uncontainable by firefighters. In a story that NPR reported on earlier this year, that changed when the fire hit the Sycan Marsh Preserve. According to the article, and I'm quoting it, it says, as the massive inferno, half the size of Rhode Island, roared into the Sycan Marsh Preserve, firefighters said the flames jumped less from treetop to treetop and instead returned to the ground, where they were easier to fight, moved more slowly, and did less damage to the overall forest. End of quote. Pete Caligari, the Oregon Forest Program Director for the Nature Conservancy, further stated, what firefighters were reporting on the ground is that when the fire came into those areas that had been thinned, it had significantly less impact. I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter this article into the hearing record.
Without objection.
Those who deny the science are rightfully being called out for their extremist views. I'd like to also enter into the record an editorial written by the Sacramento Bee editorial board last weekend entitled, Rogue Environmentalists Put Californians in Harm's Way by Blocking Forest Thinning Projects. The article discussed the Caldor fire, which was burning near South Lake Tahoe. And again, I quote, Cal Fire officials and forest managers credited previous forest treatment projects that had helped slow the fire spread and gave crews precious time to strengthen their lines and protect thousands of threatened properties. California desperately needs to thin more of its forest land and reduce fire risk, so there are more success stories like Tahoe and fewer like Paradise or Greenville. I met with the new chief of the Forest Service, Randy Moore, 2 days ago, and he credited
Let me
the
just
10,000
stop you there,
acre.
Mr. West. Without objection.
Okay.
Proceed.
Thank you. I met with the new chief of the Forest Service, Randy Moore, 2 days ago, and he credited the 10,000 acre categorical exclusion in the Lake Tahoe Basin as one of the most effective tools at the Forest Service's disposal. I know one of our witnesses today, Matt Diaz, the president of the California Forestry Association, understands firsthand how effective this tool is and how areas that have been managed are far safer for our firefighters. Again, I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here today. I look forward to your testimony and to discussing these important issues. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll now turn to the witness panel, our first witness panel. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but that their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When you begin, the timer will start and it will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining and red when your time has expired. For those members and witnesses joining remotely, I recommend that you use the stack view so that you may pin the timer on your screen. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise, and I'll also allow the entire panel to testify before questioning the witnesses. The chair will now recognize Ms. Jayleth Hall Rivera, Deputy Chief of State and Private Forestry at the U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service.
Great, thank you. Chairman Neguse, Ranking Member Fulcher, and members of this subcommittee. It's my honor to testify today for the first time as Deputy Chief for State and Private Forestry in the USDA Forest Service. I look forward to working with each of you. Today I will focus on our ongoing wildland firefighting workforce reforms. I'll talk about the challenges that wildland firefighters face and the steps that we're taking to better understand these challenges, especially with the year-round wildland fires we're experiencing now. We are committed to ensuring our firefighting workforce has the support and resources they need and deserve for the hazardous and grueling work that they do. I'm personally committed to this as one of my highest priorities in this role as Deputy Chief. The toll of longer fire seasons, more extreme fire behavior, devastating fire impacts, and pay and benefits that are not competitive is becoming unsustainable for our Forest Service firefighters. Although I've never been a wildland firefighter, I've made it a priority to engage with firefighters to understand the issues they face so we can address their needs. We have set up focus groups with wildland firefighters and union officials to hear their concerns and get their ideas on what needs to change or what we can do better. A couple of weeks ago, I was in California looking at the devastating impacts of fires on the Plumas National Forest and talking with our employees there. Our entire workforce is tired and stressed, and wildland firefighters are particularly affected by what they have been through. We are asking our firefighters to take on more with less time to recover when there are comparable positions that are paying more. They are working side by side on the fire line with state and local colleagues who make up to twice what they do. We need to do better. The Forest Service makes up a third of the workforce within the wildland fire system, and a majority of that is based in California. I have heard from many employees that they love working for the Forest Service and are deeply committed to the mission and their work as wildland firefighters. But they're not able to support and sustain their families what they're being asked to do with what they are being paid. We must ensure a stable, resilient firefighting workforce, and that starts with taking care of our brave men and women who fight fires. They deserve a better work-life balance and more comprehensive benefits. They deserve a supportive workplace in return for their hazardous, grueling work. They deserve a workplace free of harassment, particularly sexual harassment. Risk factors in the wildland firefighting environment like isolation, gender imbalance, high stress, and alcohol use are known to be conducive to harassment, especially sexual harassment. We can change some of these risk factors, and the most important thing that we can do is bring awareness to this issue, talk about it openly, and give people the tools for these conversations. In a time of increased stress, suicides, and depression, wildland firefighters also need counseling and support services to prevent tragedy. Above all, they deserve better pay. Federal wages for firefighters have not kept pace with states, localities, and private industry. As the chief stated in his testimony before the House Agriculture Committee, there are stories of firefighters sleeping in their cars or neglecting their medical needs because of this low pay. We must work to improve pay and give them a livable wage. We've already made a down payment on this commitment this year. As the president promised, we raised firefighters' base salaries so no one makes less than $15 an hour. Permanent firefighters received up to a 10% incentive, and temporary firefighters were given a $1,000 reward. But that's not nearly enough. That's just a start. We're meeting and working with firefighters, and we're listening to them to co-create permanent solutions together. And Congress is key to making these needs a reality. I'd like to briefly discuss the two bills on today's agenda that look to reform the wildland firefighting workforce. First, the Wildland Firefighter Fair Pay Act proposes to provide a premium pay cap waiver for wildland fire suppression. The bill would permanently provide a premium pay cap waiver and requires the development of a report on the resources, policies, personnel, or structural changes and other investments necessary to support an expanded full-time year-round firefighting workforce. We know we need to provide pay cap for our firefighters in the short term, and we also hope that more systemic, long-term reforms will make the need for this less in the future. Second, the Tim Hart Wildland Firefighter Classification and Pay Parity Act proposes to address a whole host of issues, from firefighter classification to pay, leave, and incentives. USDA is interested in working with the committee and bill sponsors to explore ways of increasing compensation for wildland firefighters and the ideas that are intended to address the problems we're facing. USDA does have some concerns that without additional funding, actions to increase compensation will reduce the number of firefighting personnel employed by the Forest Service. Though we're not able to endorse specific legislative proposals at this time, we're supportive of the reform efforts that will address the staffing challenges that we're facing. We look forward to working with the committee and the bill sponsors to develop solid foundations to help the Forest Service be an employer of choice. Thank you for this opportunity to appear before you. I'd be pleased to take questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hall Rivera, for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Mr. Jeff Rupert, Director of the Office of Wildland Fire at the U.S. Department of the Interior.
Good morning, Chairman Neguse, Ranking Member Fulcher, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning to discuss the Department of the Interior's Wildland Fire Management Program and firefighter workforce legislation. I believe that the bills being discussed today promote important pay, benefit, mental, and health reforms that would meaningfully address ongoing workforce issues across all DOI wildland fire management agencies, including the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Park Service. We appreciate the subcommittee's focused commitment on our nation's wildland firefighters and look forward to working with you to help advance important reforms. Climate change is an proven driver behind many of the larger, more intense wildfires that we've experienced in recent years. Drier and hotter weather and the accumulation of dead and dying vegetation is sparking larger, more intense wildfires. As we've seen, the effects to communities are devastating, and the impacts to our nation's wildland firefighters are overwhelming. As fire seasons have become fire years, firefighters have been asked to start earlier and work later into the year. In addition, they're frequently called upon to support all hazard response, such as hurricanes and other natural disasters. And we also provide international wildland fire support. Our firefighters are stretched to the limit, and many suffer from physical and mental fatigue with no time to rest and recuperate between deployments. Simply put, the pay, benefits, and wellness programs that are currently in place do not adequately support firefighter needs or reflect the realities of today's conditions. For example, this past year, every geographic area in the nation simultaneously experienced large wildfires. Every western state was in extreme drought, and over 200 million acres of land across the entire U.S. continues to have high or very high wildfire hazard potential. The nation reached preparedness level 4 on June 22nd of this year and preparedness level 5 on July 4th. And it remained at these levels for a record 99 consecutive days. We've seen weather conditions in the West change dramatically over the past few weeks, resulting in flooding and mudslides, particularly in areas recently impacted by wildfire. It's a real-time, real-life reminder that climate change is resulting in more extreme shifts in weather conditions, and we expect a continuation of widespread drought in the spring and a return to the high wildfire potential across much of the West. And right now, we're seeing high fire potential beginning to set up in the Southeast. We are unquestionably in the midst of a wildfire crisis in this country that's driven in part by climate change. The Department of the Interior plays a key role in implementing the President's executive order on tackling a climate crisis at home and abroad, and in the larger federal effort to bolster adaptation, resilience, and mitigation to the impacts of climate change. The President's commitment underscores the work underway at the Department of the Interior, including ongoing efforts to transform the firefighting workforce to permanent professional employees that are available to respond to wildfires year-round and to conduct hazardous fuels treatments during periods of low fire activity. This past year, Interior completed over 1.6 million acres of hazardous fuels treatments, which represent a nearly 40% increase in accomplishment over the last 5 years, helping to improve the resiliency and reducing wildfire risk in priority areas. However, our long-term commitment to reducing risk, tackling climate change, and enhancing operational response necessitates a significant ramp-up in our efforts to achieve these important goals. DOI is committed to working with OPM and the USDA Forest Service to study various wildland firefighting workforce reforms and is working with experts in human resources to comprehensively assess the current DOI firefighter workforce. This information will be used to help determine the size and composition of an optimal workforce and to develop a long-term strategic plan to ensure that firefighters are sufficiently paid, receive appropriate benefits, and have access to mental health and wellness programs that consider the arduous and dangerous work they perform. H.R. 5631, Tim's Act, broadly aligns with these ongoing efforts. We look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman, the co-sponsors of the bill, to further identify DOI staffing needs and consider specific reforms that help advance the department's strategic efforts. These challenges are critical to ensuring that we meet our wildland fire management program objectives. The success of our wildland fire management effort is dependent on cooperation with our partners. The Wildland Fire Leadership Council continues to provide the forum for partners in the interagency fire management community to discuss a cohesive strategy to establish resilient landscapes, support fire-adapted communities, and promote safe and effective wildfire response. We must get a handle on our nation's wildfire crisis, and to do so requires us to rethink and modernize our workforce and institute comprehensive reforms. Only then will we be able to effectively support progress towards reducing wildfire risk and protecting people, communities, and resources from the threat of wildfires. The status quo is no longer a viable management option. This concludes my statement. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Thank you both for your valuable testimony. I want to remind members that Committee Rule 3, subparagraph D, imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chair will now recognize members for any questions that they may wish to ask the witnesses, and I will start by recognizing myself. And first, just 2 broader points. Again, I want to thank both witnesses for appearing today, and certainly my colleagues for their participation. With respect to some of the discussion around hazardous fuels, which I alluded to in my opening statement, I, again, would be remiss if I didn't remind my colleagues that this committee has spent a great deal of time focusing and zeroing in on this issue, both in terms of oversight hearings and legislative hearings. I think it's an issue in an area that has garnered bipartisan support and concern, and that is evidenced by the legislation we introduced, the Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Bill, which this committee heard earlier this year. That bill was a direct byproduct of precisely the situation with respect to the Cameron Peak fire that my friend, good friend and colleague from Idaho, Mr. Fulcher, referenced, the fire in my district, where we know that prior hazardous fuels treatments ultimately did, in fact, make a profound difference, precisely why we have led the effort to try to scale up the funding available to USDA and to DOI to engage in broader treatments across the country. As my colleagues, I'm sure, are aware, the Build Back Better plan includes roughly $50 billion, the largest investment in our forests, literally in the history of the country. And there are a variety of different line items within that funding that ultimately would go to exactly what some of my colleagues have been pushing for. So I certainly hope that they would join me in supporting that particular piece of legislation, given their stated support for those investments. I also want to say thank you to all of those who have attended today's hearing, and in particular, the various stakeholders who were so integral to the development of both of these bills, but in particular, Tim's Law. As has been mentioned, Tim's Law is named after Tim Hart, a brave and heroic smoke jumper who tragically died earlier this year in the line of duty, ultimately servicing others and protecting our communities in the West and in New Mexico in the fire that he was working on. And we, of course, mourn his loss, and we are so grateful to Michelle, his devoted wife, who has converted her anguish and grief into action and has been the primary driver behind this particular piece of legislation, as she has spent the better part of the last 6 months working to convince lawmakers about the need to ensure that our federal wildland firefighters are adequately compensated. And I can think of no better way to honor Tim's memory than in making this bill, this legislation, the law of the land. So with that, I want to ask Ms. Hall Rivera and Mr. Rupert, you both a question with respect to the classification issue. We use the term federal wildland firefighter to refer to the fire workforce at Interior and at the Forest Service, but as you know, this is not how these jobs are formally, I should say, classified. My legislation would create a federal wildland firefighter classification, but the secretaries would, of course, have to determine which current positions meet that definition. Under the current system, when we refer to federal wildland firefighters, what type of positions does that imply? And maybe we'll start with you, Ms. Hall Rivera.
Yes, thank you, Congressman, for that question. Generally, under that category, we would be talking about fire response personnel, people in fire leadership positions, fire equipment operators, people who do logistics support, and people who do aviation operations.
And I assume that also includes vehicle operators. I don't know if you mentioned those as well.
Yes, vehicle operators, people in engines.
Managers. Yeah. Got it. Okay. And within that workforce, what is the approximate, kind of back of the envelope breakdown between permanent and seasonal?
In the Forest Service, it's about 60% permanent, 40% temporary, but our goal is to increase that to about 80-20.
Got it. And, I just would say, I think there's broad support here on Capitol Hill for the Forest Service's transition to that 80-20 breakdown. The wildfires in the West, notwithstanding the efforts that we are making in terms of mitigation and resilience, they are likely to continue and become all the more pervasive. And so getting to that 80% number, I think, is really important. I believe you both obliquely referenced the Biden administration's announcement earlier this year around DOI and USDA temporarily raising pay for federal wildland firefighters, which we, of course, welcomed that development, and we're very appreciative of the administration's decision in that regard. The intention was to recruit and to retain wildland firefighters for this calendar year. And I guess what I wonder is if you could talk about the challenges of recruitment and retention impacting the fire workforce in recent years and your experiences, and whether or not these kinds of incentives have proven successful in serving their purpose to recruit and to retain firefighters.
Certainly, Congressman, I would say, yes, we do have challenges recruiting and retaining firefighters, in particular in California, where there is a lot of competition and where states and other entities pay quite a bit higher than we do. And what I can say about the incentives that we put in place this year is that they were a morale boost. I know our firefighters appreciated them. It's probably a little bit too soon to tell if they are having an impact on our firefighting workforce this year, but these kinds of incentives and these kinds of reforms will have a positive impact, I believe.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. I will yield back and will now recognize Ranking Member Fulcher for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a question for both Ms. Hall Rivera and Mr. Rupert, if I could get some feedback from you both, please. But earlier, I had sent a letter along with Ranking Member Westerman and Senators Daines and Barrasso and Congressman Newhouse, Chairman of the Western Caucus. That letter went both to the USDA and the Department of Interior, and it inquired about the president's vaccine mandate for federal wildland firefighters. Because we've heard a lot about the agency's recruitment and retention challenges. So this question is in regard to the impact of what a vaccine mandate would do on that effort. So could I get a little bit of input from both of you on how you are anticipating that mandate will affect your efforts with having a strong workforce in firefighting?
Thank you, Congressman. I think the simplest answer to your question, at least from my perspective, is right now we don't know yet. We're in the midst of implementing the vaccine mandate across our agency, and not only taking the steps to communicate the requirement and administer the requirement, but also, to measure and monitor interiors and employees across the interiors interaction with all of that. So I think that still remains to be determined.
Okay, Ms. Rivera, please.
Yes, Congressman, I'd echo that. We still have data coming in our workforce. About half of the Forest Service workforce has filled out the surveys, so we don't have right now a solid sense of exactly how it's going to impact our firefighting capacity. I think no doubt it's going to create complexities, and DOI and the Forest Service are going to work through that with each other and with our partners.
Thank you. That was very politically correct. Let me just tell you this. It's not going to help any. So let me just forewarn you a little bit on that. This question is for Ms. Rivera. The physical and mental toll of fighting catastrophic fires is pretty substantial. And as we examine ways to improve medical and mental resources for wildland firefighters, it is important that we understand the existing systems in place. Ms. Rivera, can you please talk about the existing programs in place to support mental and physical health of our firefighters, please?
Yes, I'd be pleased to talk about that, Congressman. In the Forest Service, in fact, we just rolled out a new employee assistance program where we have mental health providers that we can have our employees have access to who are specially trained to work with people in career fields like wildland firefighting or like law enforcement. And so we are getting people who have training in, say, PTSD and other kinds of mental health issues that we know in particular affect our wildland firefighting workforce. And we're just rolling that out and getting our employees access to that. So we're really pleased with that update. And that is a result of us hearing from firefighters that that's what they needed.
Great, thank you. Ms. Rivera, I've only got a minute left, so this will have to be quick. But President Biden had recently raised the pay for federal wildland firefighters to $15 per hour. And Chairman Negus's bill goes a step further, takes that to $20 per hour. If the administration is supportive of that provision of Representative Negus's bill, why did the president just raise it to 15 and not 20 when he did that move earlier?
Well, I know we were looking at the $15 an hour, and the president was really focused on that to get it up to something that he was focused on for increasing the federal minimum wage, and I think that was the number that was in play at that time. But certainly looking at something like $20 an hour also makes a lot of sense from my perspective. So I don't think there's a large differentiation between those two.
May not be large differentiation to some, but it probably is to the firefighters. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. The chair will now recognize Mr. Gallego if he is available, and if not, we will go to Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here actually in the hearing room.
Mr. Gallego, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm in the
room.
hearing room.
Terrific.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks to all the witnesses for testifying today on this important issue. As you know, my home state of Arizona has seen a rise in severe, frequent, and very damaging fires over the past years, and we're a prime example of where fire seasons have turned into fire years, unfortunately. This year alone, we've seen tremendous damage from fires like the Telegraph Fire, which destroyed 51 structures and burned across 180,000 acres. That's why I'm glad we're having this hearing today to discuss how to prevent and treat these fires and how to take care of the people, more importantly, performing this important work. My first question is for Ms. Hall Rivera from the Forest Service. This year set a record for the number of days at fire preparedness level 5, the highest level. Can you explain what PL5 means in terms of the availability of personnel and resources?
Sure, thank you for that question, Congressman. When we're at preparedness level 5, that means all of the geographic areas in the country are having significant fire activity, and that means our resources are limited. You know, our fire resources in this country are not just federal, they're all land, state, tribal, local, contracting, and at preparedness level 5, even that significant array of resources is limited, and that means we go into a kind of a mode that I call triage, where we have to prioritize the fires that are placing the most people and the communities at risk first. So that's where we are going to send resources during preparedness level 5. Some fires that maybe don't have that exposure for communities might not get all the resources that they ask for when we're at preparedness level 5.
And how does the higher demand for firefighting and the longer fire season impact the agency's ability to carry out its other responsibilities? Like, is it distracting you or drawing resources away?
Well, it's certainly a challenge. It makes it difficult for us to do hazardous fuels treatment work, in particular when we have these longer fire seasons. When fire seasons are fire years, employees who would normally be doing that hazardous fuels treatment work or doing the prescribed fires are often out on fires. And when the fire year does come to an end, they need that time to rest and recover. And so it is difficult for us to get all of our other mission work done with these longer and longer fire seasons.
So based on this year and other recent years where the demand and duration of fire season cause shortages, are the agencies anticipating a need for more fire personnel annually going forward? And how can Congress help the agency meet this challenge?
Yes, Congressman, I'd say in the Forest Service, we certainly are anticipating the need for more firefighters. We would like to have more permanent firefighters, as I stated earlier, but it's important that we actually grow our capacity as well. We need some targeted firefighters and people who are specialists in, say, technology use, analysts. You know, we're getting more and more technology into 21st century firefighting. But the other thing that we need is that we need to be able to have larger crew sizes so that people can take time off, so they can rest, and so they can have a work-life balance. And so that's going to mean that we are going to need more firefighters, at least for the Forest Service.
Great. Now, my second set of questions about the personnel responsible for fighting these fires. Ms. Hall Rivera, how prevalent are veterans among wildland firefighters? I actually served with a couple of Marines in Iraq that are actually now current wildland firefighters. Love to see what percentage of the population is that, and can we increase recruitment?
Yes, Congressman, I can't say the specific percentage, but what I can tell you is we have a number of veterans who are firefighters, both in the Department of the Interior and the Forest Service. We're very proud of that. And we do a lot of recruiting as well, targeted to veterans. We have some entire fire crews that are in fact made up of veterans. We have a position in the Forest Service in Fire and Aviation Management, a person whose job it is to be a liaison with veterans and with DOD. And so we have a number of folks who are military veterans serving in our wildland firefighting force.
Great. I mean, it seems like they're the right population in terms of the harshness of the environment and the dedication to the work. The one concern, obviously, is that, you know, the older you get, I was a Marine infantryman, and, you know, doing crazy things at 20 was fine. But once you start hitting your 30s, you know, it's important that you start making this into a career with benefits, and obviously your body will just start breaking down the older you get. So one of the things that I would hope that we could look out for these men and women is that they, you know, A, get the pay, B, get the career attainment and going for them so they could actually make a true career out of this, and that we take care of them both physically and mentally, because, you know, both, obviously war is traumatizing, but firefighting, especially wildland firefighting, can be extremely traumatizing. And with that, I yield back my time. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Westerman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Nagus, and thank you again to the witnesses for being here. You know, we've talked about the needed increase for firefighter pay, which I agree with. There's been testimony about the effects of changing climate, warming temperatures, drier weather on forest fires. That's something we need to agree with and work on. But we seem to be floating these red herrings down the stream, not looking at the real issue that's killing our forest, that's killing firefighters and destroying our environment. and that's forest management. And as long as I'm in Congress, you're never going to quit hearing that squeaky wheel. I'm going to be talking about it every chance I get. And the data backs it up. This past spring, I had some forestry professors that were hiking in Kings Canyon, and they contacted me and said, something has to be done. Kings Canyon is an inferno waiting to go up. Can you do anything? I said, well, I've been trying to do something, but nobody wants to listen. Little did I know that Kings Canyon was going to go up in flames. I told them they were like prophets, being there this spring. They didn't mention climate change. What they mentioned was species that had grown up into as ladder fuels that shouldn't be there, that in history they weren't there. Here's a report, 1,000 years of history, fire scar rings from Kings Canyon and Yosemite. For 1,000 years, there was an average of 31 fires per century in those forests. Magically, in 1900, in the last century, if you look at some of these groves, the giant forest grove, there were 2 fires in the 19th century, or the 20th century. In the Mountain Home Grove, there were 2 fires. In the Mariposa Grove, there were 5 fires. We thought we could go in and put the fires out and everything would be okay, and we've quit doing management. And it's gotten worse than that. We've quit thinning. And until we get back to the science and do what we should do, we're going to see more firefighters die. We're going to see more forests go up in flames. We're going to see more environmental damage. There's no organism on Earth that sequesters carbon more than a giant sequoia. Giant redwoods are the second ones. We're seeing those forests go up into flames. Deputy Chief Hall Rivera, I quoted from a Sacramento Bee article editorial in my opening statement. That editorial went on to talk about radical environmental groups that are spreading false, quote, agenda-driven science. It stated, by weaponizing federal protections such as the National Environmental Policy Act and the Endangered Species Act to obstruct or outright kill various wildlife prevention projects, environmentalists imperil the very ecosystems they wish to protect. Can you please talk about the challenges the Forest Service is facing expediting critical management projects from, quote, bulletproofing NEPA documents to defending projects against frivolous litigation due to this agenda-driven science? And I'll say, a couple of years ago, I was out at South Lake Tahoe and I saw that project, and I thought, this is great. They're actually doing forest management in California on the National Forest. And now we saw where that very project helped stop that fire. So I know you all are trying, but can you talk about what's involved in bulletproofing these NEPA documents?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. And I just want to say, we absolutely agree with you for the need to significantly scale up fuels treatments. That's the only way that we're going to get ahead of this, and the only way that we are going to create, safer communities and safer places for our firefighters to fight fires. We do have challenges in the Forest Service with some of our projects, certainly. We do have litigation challenges, particularly in certain regions of the country. And, we're working with our partners there. We're working through collaboratives. We have been doing a lot of work to shift and change some of the decision-making processes that we have so that they are less onerous and less burdensome for our staff. But yeah, it is a challenge, and it's one that we would like to continue to work together with you all on.
Thank you. And quickly, I would like to insert another article from the Sacramento Bee into the record. It's entitled, quote, Self-Serving Garbage, Wildfire Experts Escalate Fight Over Saving California Forest. That article quotes Crystal Colden, a professor of wildfire science at UC Merced, and she said, quote, I and my colleagues are getting really tired of the type of activism that pretends to be science and in fact is just self-serving garbage. If a lot of these environmental groups continue to stand by these antiquated and really counterproductive viewpoints, all we're going to see is more catastrophic wildfire that destroys the very forest that they pretend to love. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to insert that article to the record. And the data on the giant sequoias.
So ordered as well.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I've got a lot more to say, but I yield back.
Mr. Westerman, do you? Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to thank Chair Neguse and Ranking Member Fulcher for having this very important hearing. In recent years, California has obviously seen some of the biggest wildfires in our state's history, but this problem goes beyond California, goes beyond Idaho, Colorado, the rest of the Western United States. We have seen fires, huge fires, in Australia, Greece, Siberia, the Amazon, all over the world. These unprecedented, massive fires are making headlines of their own. Now, Ranking Member of the full committee in his opening remarks gave quite a speech blaming radical environmentalists and Democrats for all of this and claiming that he is following the science. That is just really disappointing. Partisan attacks and scapegoating are great if you're just trying to score political points, but if you're serious about tackling a serious problem like this, it's just not helpful. I don't know what straw man the ranking member is fighting against. I'm as green as any member of Congress, and I support fuels reduction through thinning, clearing, prescribed burns, all of the things the science tells us can make us more resilient. Of course, we need to do more of this. And Chair Neguse reminded us that Democrats, so far without any Republican support, are walking the walk by billions of dollars into the Build Back Better Act that will go toward these important purposes. I passed bipartisan bills out of this committee that not only protect wilderness, but call for proactive forest treatments, including cutting trees, fire resilience. So look, if we're serious about science, I really urge the ranking member to include in his next speech the elephant in the room. These fires are dramatically bigger, worse, and more frequent because of climate change. Look, I am not that old. I've been in California for long enough, though, to know that just a few years ago, a big fire was 10 to 15,000 acres. 2 weeks ago, I was touring damage in a fire in my district that was well over 200,000 acres, and it was one of several in California of that magnitude. So these fires have gotten incredibly bigger, much more damaging, much more frequent. And ignoring or denying this is really a rejection of science. It's incredibly dangerous, too. It's climate change. And serious scientists, serious fire ecologists will all tell you that. And as bad as this mega fire problem is, it will get worse if we fail to take action on climate change. In other words, if you oppose tackling climate pollution, and the problem isn't radical environmentalists or Democrats or anyone else who try to scapegoat. The problem is you. Now, while we work on that disconnect on climate change, we have to try to work together to make sure our federal agencies have the resources, the personnel, and the policies to better fight these huge fires that keep happening. And we are fortunate to have great wildland firefighters in California, at CAL FIRE, at the Forest Service, at the Department of Interior. I want to make sure that our federal firefighters are offered the compensation and benefits they need to be competitive with CAL FIRE and others. So, Ms. Hall Rivera, in the time I have left, I'd like you to speak to interagency collaboration. Once again, there was a major fire in my district this year that happened on Forest Service land. As usual, local community and others have complained that they feel like our federal firefighters don't have the resources, aren't compensated properly, are just not able to compete with their better supported CAL FIRE counterparts. So can you talk about what we're doing to try to bridge that disconnect? And maybe also talk about the number of personnel that are typically required for these large complex fires and the type of assignments that they have, the number of days and weeks that are demanded of them, and what that means for your efforts to bridge that personnel gap.
Yes, thank you for that question, Congressman. You're absolutely correct that especially in California, that disparity is very stark between federal wildland firefighters and CAL FIRE. In some instances, for similar jobs, those in CAL FIRE can make up to twice what our federal wildland firefighters pay. And that is a particular challenge and a problem. And I know we're committed to working together to try to change that. The Department of the Interior, the Forest Service, OPM, and others are already beginning to work together to formulate proposals going forward for how we can get better compensation for our firefighters. And, the bills today are just one example of that. So, I can tell you are absolutely committed to that. We know we need to do better, and we are working together on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer, for 5 minutes. Mr. Gomer, I don't see you on your visual. Mr. Gomer from Texas. Okay, I will now go to the next Republican witness, Mr. Lamborn from Colorado. Mr. Westerman, I don't know if you are still on, or Mr. Moore. Do you know who your next witness is?
Got Mr. Moore.
You want me to go to Mr. Moore? Okay, Mr. Moore, you're now recognized. The gentleman from Utah, Mr. Moore, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Just confirming that panel 1, correct? Things, this is my time to shine as a freshman. I'm now moved up the batting order a little bit. Thank you. Thanks for having this. I'm okay with both. I actually recently just spoke to Western Interstate Region, a whole bunch of county commissioners from across the country. There was Democrats and Republicans there, and we all talked about it. I know that many of us on this group, there's long-term, there's short-term solutions, and we've got to be able to address it in an all-encompassing way. And so I like the push as we continue to discuss and debate and what's important for our districts. I love the push from my ranking member, Westerman. It's been really good to know his expertise, his experience in forestry, working on the counter side, working with Democrats to know what they're willing to do on the short-term solutions. Let's do this and be as productive as possible. I think we need a strong push from all angles. And I only care about Utah. I don't. I care about a lot more, but Utah is experiencing a lot of drought. We've had a lot of good precipitation in the fall that I think will provide a good layer of pre-winter precipitation. So hopefully after our snowpack, we get a lot more runoff into our reservoirs. That's the key. That's key for us. And but the risk of wildfires is going to be very strong, and it's going to be imminent, and it needs those short-term solutions. So we have to address this. Let me ask a couple questions to Associate Deputy Chief Hall Riviera. In July, I was proud to introduce the bipartisan Bicameral Fire Sheds Act, which would facilitate cooperative agreements between governors and land management agencies, expedite the environmental review process for at-risk areas, and give our land managers the tools they need to prevent fire in the first place. Shared stewardship agreements. I think there's so much value in these. Local folks working with federal agencies in their areas to be able to really tackle the issues. Can you discuss how the National Environmental Policy, so NEPA, makes it difficult to prevent wildfire?
Well, thank you for that question, Congressman. And I would just, first of all, agree with you that collaborative partnerships and shared stewardship are actually absolutely imperative in doing the fuels treatment work that we need to do across boundaries to make a difference. It's also absolutely imperative that we work together with all of our collaborators, in particular states, localities, and tribes in fighting fire. It's an all lands problem, and it takes all lands solutions. As I said earlier, we do have some challenges with NEPA. It does take us time, longer time than we'd like to get projects done, but we have a lot of successes around the country as well in using categorical exclusions and other tools that are provided under NEPA.
Excellent, thank you. Also, we this summer in Utah we had ranked as some of the worst air quality days as some of the fires from the Western United States, from California, Oregon, I don't know exactly where all the smoke came from. We just saw it sort of rolling in some of those days. We've talked a lot about climate change and carbon emissions. Has the Forest Service done any recent reporting on the amount of carbon emitted by wildfires or any other harmful environmental impacts associated with our worsening wildfire crisis?
Congressman, I'm not aware of any recent reports. We certainly have numerous experts in carbon capture and climate science in the Forest Service, and so we can get back with you on any recent reports on that topic.
Yeah, it's my understanding there can be some type of penalty assessed from the EPA if with respect to how this all plays out with wildfires. Again, all encompassing, right? We've got to be thinking big picture, and there is an enormous amount that gets emitted. Again, I'm going to lean and push a lot on the short-term solutions, and with respect to Ranking Westerman's push as well. But we just have to always be thinking about it in a big term. So I'm up on time here. So I'll yield back, but we'll stick on and can address some of these other questions too.
Very much. The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes herself for 5 minutes. The goal with this bill is to take care of our forests and our communities by paying wildland firefighters a living wage and giving them a workable schedule. And we're already taking a huge step forward with this bill. But as fires get bigger and more unpredictable, at some point, we're just going to need more people. That is just a fact. Ms. Hall-Rivera, how many wildland firefighters do you currently have at U.S. Forest Service, both seasonal and full-time?
We have a little over 10,000 firefighters, seasonal and permanent, Congresswoman.
And Mr. Rupert, how many do you have in Interior?
We have right over 5,300.
Okay, so around 15,000 together. Your crews work something like 80 to 90 days at preparedness level 4 or 5. These are big fires like the Dixie Fire. Ms. Hall-Rivera, is that right?
Yes, we were at 99 days of preparedness level 4 and 5 this year.
How does that compare? Is that typical?
No, it's not. We went to preparedness level 5, I think the third earliest in a decade this year, and we were at the preparedness level 5 over 80 days, and so no, that's very atypical, though probably becoming more and more the norm into the future.
When you're at that tempo, at that high preparedness level for those long stretches, people get burned out and they quit. But you have other problems too that directly limit our ability to fight fires. Flight crews get grounded because they haven't had the sleep. You have to skip prescribed burns because you don't have the manpower. So with those extra firefighters from the BID, what's the number of days going to be ballpark that you could go at PL45?
You know, I don't know if I could answer that question exactly, Congresswoman, but what I can say is the funding that's provided in the bid for the Forest Service and the Department of the Interior to convert additional firefighters into permanent and help us increase their salaries is absolutely going to be very beneficial when we're looking at these kinds of seasons that we have now where we are at these preparedness levels 4 and 5 for a significant part of the summer.
Ms. Hall-Rivera, and I'm going to ask you the same question, Mr. Rupert, so you can get ready. What is the goal here? How many firefighters, given the current situation of a year-round fire season, there's no such thing as fire season, just year-round fires, very large, as Mr. Huffman pointed out, very sustained burns, very hot burns. How many firefighters do we need at the U.S. Forest Service?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I really appreciate that question. You know, I don't know if I can put my finger on an exact number because we are doing the same kind of work that DOI is doing in terms of some really in-depth assessments of our workforce. What I can say is that we need more. We need more permanent firefighters. We need more firefighters who have specialized expertise, specialized analytics expertise, who know how to use technology like unmanned aircraft systems. And as I said earlier, we absolutely need to grow our firefighting crews so that people can take time off, so that they can have a work-life balance, so they have someone to back and support them over the course of the summer when they need to be gone, for say, a kid's ball game or something. So we can get back with you with exact numbers, but what I can tell you is that we absolutely need more.
And I appreciate that, Ms. Holderver, and I just want to encourage you to continue doing that analysis. I want to encourage those above you to continue, pushing forward on doing that. And also, if you wish to take that back for the record and submit kind of a range of numbers under possible scenarios, I think that is very, very helpful for the public and for Congress to understand. Kind of, are we talking about an additional 100 firefighters or doubling the force from 10,000 to 20,000? Can you narrow that down at all, or do you wish to do that for the record?
We're happy to provide that to you for the record, Congresswoman.
Thank you. Turning now to Mr. Rupert, you said you had about 5,000 firefighters at DOI. How many do you need? How many should there be at Interior?
Well, I know we need more than we have now. In 21, we asked for support to convert and expand our workforce. We got that support, and so we've implemented that. In 22, we've asked for some additional support to expand our firefighting workforce, and so we're hopeful there. Looking forward beyond 22, 23, and beyond, we are in the middle of an assessment to really try to put good, solid numbers behind the optimal need. I think, in addition to what's the federal need, it's also important just to point out interagency wildland fire, all of these incidents, these large catastrophic fires that we're talking about here, they're responded to by federal firefighters, state firefighters, local firefighters, tribal firefighters. Really the patches on folks' arms kind of go away on those incidents. And so it's not just a federal need that, we have to interact with. We've got to interact and consider the whole interagency community.
Thank you very much. My time has expired. The chair will now recognize the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Harrell, for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to start off by honoring Tim.
Ms. Harrell, I just want to let you know we can't see you, but we can hear you just fine. Could you, we'll pause and let you turn your camera on and reset the timer.
I'm in the committee room.
Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, you're very small, so I apologize on my screen. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Now, don't take that off my 5 minutes. But I'd like to...
I will not. We're resetting.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And first, I want to start off by honoring Tim Hart, a firefighter who was tragically died from injuries sustained while fighting fire in my district in New Mexico earlier this year. Tim was a member of the West Yellowstone Smoke Jumpers based in Montana and touched many people across the West with his service. I know his wife is on the Hill this week advocating for Tim's fellow firefighters, and we must continue to lift not only Tim's actual family, but his firefighting family up in prayer. I also would like to thank Chairman Neguse for naming his bill after Tim, as I feel this is very fitting. I appreciate this hearing today, and I think we can all agree we must take action, but we also know that forest management is one of the most important things we can do to save lives of our firefighters. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to release the balance of my time to Ranking Member Westerman.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I want to talk about climate. I want to talk about natural climate solutions and just some basic issues here. I want to ask the witnesses: do you believe that forests sequester carbon?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, of course.
And do you believe that that carbon stays in the trees as long as the trees are there and healthy?
Yes.
And even in wood products like this Diaz is wood. It's about 50% by dry weight carbon that was sequestered from the atmosphere long ago before these trees were harvested. Do you believe the report that came out from the World Economic Forum that said that if we planted 1 trillion trees across the planet, we could significantly reduce carbon in the atmosphere?
Yes, absolutely. Tree planting is a really important natural climate solution, Congressman.
Do you believe that if, when forests burn, it releases carbon into the atmosphere?
Yes.
Do you believe it's, if we have healthy forests, we're doing our part, we're doing part of the work that we need to do to keep carbon out of the atmosphere and make the planet a healthier place?
Yes, healthy, resilient forests are a very important part of that.
So I want to use a medical metaphor, things we've often heard that prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Last year, Forest Service and DOI together spent $4.38 billion, or this year they spent $4.38 billion for fire suppression, and the fire season isn't even over. We thought 2020 was bad. That number was $2.27 billion. That's a 64% increase in firefighting. And again, I support paying our wildland firefighters a fair wage. You testified we have about 15,000 firefighters across the two agencies. If we doubled the number of firefighters and paid $50 an hour, would that prevent forest fires from happening?
Well, no, it wouldn't prevent forest fires from happening. Your point about also having to do the treatment at the same time is really critical. And the fact is, we're in a situation right now where we've got to do both, right? We've got to respond. We have significant response challenges because of the states that our forests are in and a variety of other factors. So we've got to have the workforce to do the response, and we've got to have the workforce to do the fuels treatments.
And we're obviously spending a lot of money on suppression, but we're not spending the money we need to spend or giving the attention to prevention, which again, that's obviously the best medicine. If we were to spend half of the $4.5 billion on fire prevention, would that make a difference to climate over time?
Yes, it would certainly help in terms of restoring resilient forests. We estimate, at least for the National Forest System, we need to treat an additional 20 million acres over the next decade, and that could cost up to $20 billion or more. So it's an expensive proposition to do the fuels treatment in the places that it needs to be done.
This is a massive geography problem. Can we make a difference with axes and shovels and rakes, or is this going to have to be a large-scale, mechanized, planned-out approach?
Well, we certainly need a strategic planned-out approach, Congressman. We need to have strategically placed treatments. They need to be in the right places, and they need to be at the scale of the problem. Fires are outpacing our fuels treatments, even the ones that are helping us. So they've got to be larger, and we've got to use all the tools in the toolbox. That's mechanical treatment, that's herbicides, that's chipping, that's prescribed fire, and that's natural fire where it makes sense. We've got to have all the tools at our disposal to make a difference.
Thank you for that honest reply, and I would just like to say I'm ready and willing to work with anybody across the aisle that wants to do a real approach to affecting climate through natural climate solutions, something that works and something that's not just fluff or to make us feel good about what we're doing, but actually to see results out on the ground. Thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Legre Fernandez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. In that last exchange, it reminded me that I visited in an AUES Vida tour in New Mexico, the work that we are doing in collaboration with our pueblos, in collaboration with our acequias on actually managing the forest. And the Climate Conservation Corps funding that we are seeking would go a long way to help increase the number of boots on the ground, and boots on the ground of Pueblo members, of Latinos who live in the area, so that we are working on this in a coordinated manner, because it is important, and it is important to realize that that is part of what we are doing. We are focused now today on actually the fires are there, and we need to make sure that we provide the resources to our wildland firefighters that they need, especially because they are us. They're from our communities. All my brothers fought fires. You know, my first job was with a firefighter. I know what these are like, and they are part of our community. Their fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers. They are Mr. Hart's family. They are Mr. Hart's family. And so we need to give them not only our support or our thanks, but real resources, both in the immediate and the long term. Deputy Chief Rivera, I know you spoke about the Forest Service's new medical assistance program earlier. Following up on that, for seasonal or temporary positions, are health resources available during the off-season?
Yes, Congresswoman,
Elaborate a little bit more.
in the Forest Service,
resources?
even during the off-season, our temporary firefighters have access to the Employee Assistance Program. And we've been very purposeful about that because we know that some of these mental health needs in particular crop up during the off-season. When you're not there without a, adrenaline rush happening every day, that's when your brain slows down and you have time to think, and that's when you need those services the most.
Oh, thank you very much. And what are for doing that, and what are the ways that we might be able to minimize exposure to, we have evacuation threat, to some of the environmental hazards that come along with firefighting?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It is difficult. We know that smoke obviously has an impact not only on communities, but on our wildland firefighters. And, the best way that we can probably go about mitigating that is, as I said earlier, to grow our crew sizes so that people don't have to take back-to-back-to-back assignments, so that they can take some time off even during the height of fire activity. So that's probably one of the main ways to do that. This year in the Forest Service, we did institute a 3-day rest period between assignments. And so that helped folks build up their resilience, and I think probably did help in terms of limiting exposure as well.
Great. And following up on that, Director Rupert, could you please tell us more about the policy providing time off for employees and how this time off that Deputy Chief Rivera mentioned, how is that likely to impact their annual salary?
Yeah, so in Interior, similarly, we largely followed suit with extending to 3 days R&R after a deployment. We're working in Interior right now to sort of coordinate across the 4 land management bureaus to ensure that, we have a consistent approach to that. And in terms of pay, it doesn't have a detrimental effect to firefighter pay.
Thank you. And with that, I'll yield back.
Very much. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Obernolte, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. I represent one of the largest districts in the United States, a district that is over 90% public lands. So the issue of wildfire management is one that's very near and dear to my heart. And along those lines, I have a couple of questions for our witnesses. I'll start with Mr. Rupert. If I could ask about fuels reduction in wilderness designated areas. I'll read from the BLM Forest Management Handbook what it has to say about that. It says, fuel treatment, this includes thinning or removing native vegetation mechanically or chemically in the advance of or replacement for wildland fire, either wildfire or prescribed fire. The goal of fuel treatment is to make conditions possible for wildfire to return to the wilderness where past management practices has reduced the historic frequency and intensity of wildfire. And then it says fuel treatment is not allowed in wilderness except in rare circumstances. So obviously we in Congress have been having an intense debate over whether or not to expand wilderness designation to more areas of the national forest. And I'd like your opinion about whether or not a wilderness designation is a good thing or a bad thing from the standpoint of forest management and particularly wildfire prevention.
Well, so specifically to national forest wilderness, that would be a better question for Jalith. In Interior, Wilderness values focused on, that naturalness. By and large, the hope and the expectation is that, essentially those wilderness areas receive that fire and reoccurring at sort of a natural rate, natural cycle. There are examples in interior, and I don't have numbers in front of me, but certainly even my own experiences when I was in the field managing, there are, prescribed fire, for example, in and adjacent to affecting wilderness is something that does occur. I do think there is the ability and the opportunity to manage wilderness, protect additional wilderness, and also address fire risk issues, wildfire risk.
Would that include allowing more fuels reduction in wilderness designated areas?
I think, with a focus on wilderness, certainly considering wilderness values, sending crews in with chainsaws and mechanized equipment, clearly is not a good fit with wilderness values. But, activities like prescribed fire certainly have the potential to be a real fit.
Okay. Well, I know it's caused some angst and some worry among some forest managers that they're not able to go in, because if you've seen how much work it takes a hand crew to do fuels reduction in a wilderness area because they can't use mechanized equipment, it really opens your eyes to, the fact that we really need to get our arms around this problem. If we're going to commit to fuels reduction, which in some areas is the only practical way of mitigating the risk, then I think we've got to rethink this policy. But anyway, thank you for the candid answer. Ms. Hall-Rivera, as you're aware, recently we closed all 18 national forests in California due to the wildfire risk there. And although we all share the common goal of saving life and minimizing the risk of the spread of wildfire, it caused a lot of angst in the communities that I represent, particularly the ones that depend on access to national forest. And in particularly, the angst centered around the fact that the Forest Service told the communities that the purpose was to be able to redirect personnel to fight the fires and to be able to facilitate evacuations if a wildfire should occur. However, people in my communities can tell you there still seem to be plenty of rangers that were willing to write tickets for people that were in their own national forests. And lots of people would point out that day use was included in that ban, and those people are no evacuation risk. So my question is, in the future, when these kinds of closures are necessary, how can we better manage that process to address the need to mitigate the risk, but also maybe to address the concerns of the community?
Yes, thank you for that question, Congressman. And we don't take those decisions lightly because we know how impactful they are on our communities that are near our national forests. And I know that all of our regional foresters and forest managers are committed to working with the public, committed to working with communities when they have to make those decisions, being transparent and having discussions ahead of time. And I can say that we're going to continue to be committed to those open dialogues. And we welcome the feedback. We welcome that kind of feedback so that we can do it better in the future.
I hope so too, because I think that if we engage all those stakeholders ahead of time, we can better communicate that message and maybe reform our process to address those concerns. I see I'm out of time. Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. We are now going to transition to our second panel. As with the first panel, oral statements will be limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will be made part of the record. When you begin, the timer will start and it will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining and red when your time has expired. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid inadvertent background noise. I will also allow the entire panel to testify before recognizing witnesses. Before introducing witnesses, I will remind non-administration witnesses that they are encouraged to participate in the Witness Diversity Survey created by the Congressional Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Witnesses may refer to their hearing invitation materials for further information. The chair now recognizes Ms. Kelly Martin, president of Grassroots Wildland Firefighters, and the former chief of fire and aviation management at Yosemite National Park.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Fulcher, Ranking Member Westerman, and members of this committee. My name is Kelly Martin. I'm the current president of Grassroots Wildland Firefighters. I was requested to appear before you today to help support and advocate for long overdue legislative reforms urgently needed for our federal wildland fire workforce. Our workforce includes firefighters who work for the Department of Agriculture, U.S. Forest Service, and the Department of Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, and the National Park Service. I have over 35 years of distinguished federal service to the American public as a wildland firefighter. For the better part of my adult life, I have worked for both the U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service in 7 different states. The last 14 years of my employment, I was the Chief of Fire and Aviation at Yosemite National Park. Prior to my retirement in 2019, I found it extremely difficult to advocate for workforce reforms for the benefit of federal wildland firefighters due to the fear of reprisal or conflict with upper-level management. Recommending vast changes like what is presented to you in this bill has potential unintended consequences to current federal employees' careers, a compelling reason why so many federal wildland firefighters who support our efforts wish to remain anonymous. This fear prevents well-intended individuals from speaking up. Our grassroots organization was formed by a common bond. We are all current or former federal wildland firefighters. We believe our expert frontline experience provides unique expertise to best inform elected officials, reporters, and senior agency officials. Our core value is to remain open and positive to all comments and criticisms and to directly engage with members of Congress, senior agency leadership, and when current and future reforms impacting the wildland firefighters are considered. These reforms have come about due to years of oppressive entry-level wages below minimum wage in some states, up to 30% higher than average suicide rates, 30% higher than average increase in cardiovascular disease, and a 43% higher than average increase in lung cancer. Something must give. These harmful physical and mental burdens can no longer be borne by our first responder federal wildland firefighters. It is the duty of our federal wildland fire agencies to weave these reforms into a safety net for our current and future federal wildland fire workforce. Their lives depend upon your ability to take action. The recent notoriety of federal wildland firefighters' misclassification as forestry technicians, entry-level pay starting at $13.45 an hour, lack of benefits afforded to other state, federal, and municipal fire agencies, lack of access to mental health resources, and homeless wildland firefighters sleeping in their truck or in campgrounds is why we are here today. Our workforce is not prepared for the unrelenting environmental, political, and social demand for a safe, effective, and efficient federal wildfire response, to say nothing of the future workforce that will be needed to increase the pace and scale of landscape treatments. We are in a race to the bottom if we leave here today accepting the status quo. The current and future demand for up-and-coming employees with operational field experience for mid and upper-level incident management teams and agency leadership positions could not be greater. The consequences of inaction are clear. The resignation of just one federal wildland firefighter represents a significant financial and institutional knowledge loss to the taxpayers. Competition from outside the federal government comes from state and municipal fire departments and private industry. After relentless fire seasons during the last decade, federal wildland firefighters are exiting federal service in greater numbers than ever before for predictable living wages, greater benefits afforded most other fire agencies, and access to physical and mental health support resources unique to firefighters. Along with their exit leaves a painful gap of institutional knowledge and leadership that cannot be easily replaced in a short period of time. This is not just a normal leakage of top talent. The high attrition rate of federal wildland firefighters is a dire warning, a sign deserving of congressional oversight. Grassroots wildland firefighters are actively collaborating with elected officials and agency leadership to help reverse these downward trends and bring about real and lasting workforce reforms for the next 50 years. We commend this House subcommittee for the proposed legislation sponsored by Congressman Joe Neguse and co-sponsored by Representatives Cheney, Porter, and Carbajal. We are hopeful many more representatives will support this bill. We stand by ready to provide committee members with professional and technical guidance to help refine and enhance these proposed reforms. All of us at Grassroots Wildland Firefighters are enthusiastic this vital legislation begins our transition into a modern workforce. We owe this monumental legislation effort to the memory of Tim Hart and many other federal wildland firefighters who've made the ultimate sacrifice or who have become permanently disabled in the line of duty serving as a wildland firefighter. I'm very grateful for Michelle Hart, Tim's wife, who is here with us today to witness this hearing. On behalf of thousands of federal wildland firefighters who put their lives on the line to protect life, property, and safeguard our priceless public lands, we are beyond grateful for this opportunity to testify before you today. Madam Chair, Chairman Neguse, Ranking Member Fulcher, and Ranking Member Westerman, and the members of this committee, this completes my opening statement. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Martin. The chair now recognizes Mr. Lucas Mayfield, Vice President of Grassroots Wildland Firefighters, Fire Program Manager at Mystery Ranch Backpacks, and a former Supervisory Forestry Technician at the U.S. Forest Service. Mr. Mayfield, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, and can you hear me all right? I would first like to thank the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands for this opportunity. Madam Chair, Ranking Member Fulcher, and members of the committee, my name is Lucas Mayfield, and I spent 18 years employed by the United States Forest Service. I worked in 4 regions and on 7 forests. My last 12 years were spent on interagency hotshot crews. I started as a rookie crew member and was able to serve in every position from crew member to detailed superintendent. Working for the United States Forest Service, and in particular as a hotshot, is the most gratifying job that I will ever have. It is the foundation of me as a person. For 18 years and through today, I've operated off of the values of duty, respect, and integrity. Adding to that would be the words character, accountability, attitude, and effort. The most gratifying job I have ever had serving the American public was also the reason that I chose to resign in March of 2019. Halfway towards retirement eligibility, I left regular government service due to the toll that it was taking on me mentally. This job and the demands that are placed on federal wildland firefighters led to seasonal depression, anxiety, and the thought that my family would be better off with a life insurance check. I left for an income that was plannable, livable, and allowed me to put my family first for the first time. I also left for the opportunity to take part and stand up a cohesive movement that would initiate and advocate for change within the federal wildland system. I am here today because I have not left my fire family. The Grassroots Wildland Firefighters are comprised of current, retired, and resigned federal wildland firefighters. We stood up in 2019 in order to provide a cohesive effort and a voice for a population of quiet professionals. Our motto is nothing about us without us. Since our inception, we have been advocating based off of our 4 pillars that we believe to be directly related and require a cohesive and simultaneous approach. Those 4 pillars are: number 1, wildland firefighter classification, pay, and benefits; number 2, comprehensive health and well-being; number 3, an expanded workforce, an expanded land management workforce and suppression workforce; and number 4, to investigate what a federal wildland fire service would look like. We have to take care of the existing workforce, a workforce that is comprised of some of the finest civilian public servants in the world, a workforce that responds nationally to wildfires regardless of jurisdiction, a workforce that is on the front lines of climate change, a workforce that has responded to hurricane relief, shuttle recovery, and 9/11. A workforce that includes those in secondary and primary fire positions such as dispatchers, fire managers, hotshots, smoke jumpers, engine personnel, rappellers, helitack, and many others. The Tim Hart Wildland Firefighter Classification and Pay Parity Act of 2021 is the most comprehensive and well thought out piece of legislation that will address the needs of our federal wildland firefighters that have been historically misclassified, underpaid, and oftentimes uncared for. Tim's Act directly addresses the needed reforms as it pertains to wildland firefighter classification, pay, benefits, and comprehensive health and well-being. This is what right looks like, and it's long overdue. This is the legislation that would have kept me employed by the United States Forest Service and will stop the exodus that is currently occurring while adding to the needed capacity. If the United States is to stand a chance in battling catastrophic wildfire, we need to ensure that we have a robust and mobile national response mechanism in place. This legislation ensures that we retain and recruit the workforce needed to defend communities, public lands, and critical infrastructure. My hope is that the members of this committee and Congress at large fully recognize the need for the passage of Tim's Act. Fire suppression and the preparation to suppress wildland fire is a 365-day-a-year job. We all need to recognize and accept the fact that we do not have the capacity to respond to wildland fires and manage the land. Land management agencies employ wildland firefighters, and the Tim Hart Wildland Firefighter Classification and Pay Parity Act will allow them to treat them as such in reality and not just in the news and in death. If we are the leaders in the wildland fire service and land management, then we need to support it and build it for the future. If we don't pay the cost to provide increased capacity for suppression needs and realize that there is no current capacity for land management, we will continue to lose critical infrastructure, towns, first responders, and American citizens. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayfield, for that testimony. The chair now recognizes Mr. Matt Diaz, President and CEO of the California Forestry Association.
Good morning and thank you. Again, my name is Matt Diaz. I am the president of the California Forestry Association, otherwise known as Cal Forest, and I am a registered professional forester and have been in California for nearly 2 decades. Cal Forest is an association that represents timberland owners across Central and Northern California, as well as timberland managers, mills, veneer plants, and biomass facilities. Cumulatively, we represent about 3.5 million acres in California. So just for purposes of context in the California scene, if you will, some background on California forestry and fires. I'm sure that everybody participating in this hearing today has been inundated by the headlines on California wildland fires over the past decade. But we have now entered a period over the course of the last several years that we can consider nothing less than a full-on crisis. And that crisis is not contained to just an environmental crisis. We are looking at losses of carbon stocks. We are looking at habitat loss. We are losing recreational capacity, downstream water production and quality water production. The air quality in our state is significantly impacted for months at a time. And as importantly, the timberlands in which our members manage for the sustained production of forest products that our society needs is severely at risk as well. I don't sit here to intend to drown you in statistics, but over the last 4 years, 7 of the largest wildfires in California history have occurred. 2 of those events have either nearly eclipsed or eclipsed 1 million acres at a time. 1 million acres per a single event. That is unparalleled. In 2020, 4.5 million acres on the U.S. Forest Service lands have burned. and hundreds of thousands of Cal Forest private timberlands have also been affected. Fire conditions are just simply unparalleled. Not only the size, but not only the size of individual fires, but the rate of spread and the intensity is ever increasing. So I said before you this afternoon or this morning to cover two individual topics. We want to support addressing workforce challenges within the Forest Service and other wildland firefighting forces, and stress the importance of active forest management to protect all public trust resources, communities, and other assets at risk. So in the realm of discussing the Forest Service, support for Forest Service and other federal forest, other workforce, fire protection workforce, we fully support the idea of increasing pay scale and equity amongst those individuals. We believe that the increased pay scale and the permanency of those individuals will make more readily available a workforce for not only suppression, but also for prevention activities. It'll also allow for higher levels of cooperation with state partners in our fire protection system, namely CAL FIRE. And again, we would really focus on the fact that during the fire season, which is nearly annual at times, shorter fire seasons could also rely, or these individuals could be relied upon to promote prevention activities as well as suppression activities. Along with this, we would like to see some of the suppression strategies also be reevaluated. We are looking at, or we would like to seek individuals looking at a more direct attack strategy for wildland fire suppression, and to try to limit the use of backburning as a suppression strategy. Pardon me. There's been some movement in this front in terms of a memo that was recently submitted by Randy Moore, Chief of the Forest Service, to limit the use of prescribed fire during the peak fire season. We think additional strategies can be looked at as it relates to suppression strategies in California. Turning quickly to forest protection and forest prevention activities, we strongly believe that the state of California and with its federal partners, the U.S. Forest Service, need to take a significant stance forward or movement forward to try to treat the 1 million acres that have been identified on an annual basis that need to be treated. Currently, we're only treating about 267,000 acres on federal lands, and we believe that a strong push needs to be made in order to achieve those goals as a means of protecting all the resources at risk out there. We also believe that looking at all the opportunities as it relates to cooperation amongst our federal, state partners and private entities are important. Good neighbor authority, stewardship agreements, and the like are also very important tools to move forward. I have exceeded my time, so I'm going to step down and allow for any questions that may exist. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that valuable testimony to all of our witnesses. Reminding members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chair will now recognize members for any questions that they may wish to ask the witnesses. I will start by recognizing myself. Mr. Mayfield, the suicide rate for wildland firefighters is 30 times the national average. And I hope that you'd be willing to talk with us a little bit more about why that is and what we can do about it. Under the current system, many wildland firefighters depend on overtime and hazard pay to be able to provide for their families. Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. During my time, more than half of my annual income was earned through overtime and hazard pay.
So given that, in order to make ends meet, you needed to get out there, take those extra shifts, work longer, push yourself, whether you were sick, you were injured, you were traumatized, you lost a colleague to fire. If you didn't get out there, you didn't have an income that could let your family make ends meet. Was that your experience or the experience of others around you?
Yeah, that is correct. Missing 1-2 week assignment is equivalent to a minimum of 10% of your overall earnings for that.
For the year?
Yes. And then you also owe it, as a hotshot crew, your status as a hotshot crew based off of your qualifications. So you owe that to your crew to ensure that they maintain status when they go out, and it's your family. So, you know, you compartmentalize, and your family at home takes a back seat to your fire family, and that's your priority for 5 to 6 months.
And you shared a little bit about this in your testimony, and I thank you for your honesty and your willingness to give this committee and the American people the information that they need. Could you talk a little bit about how this affected people, both the firefighters, our brave wildland firefighters themselves, but also their loved ones?
I mean, you can look at the suicide rate, the substance abuse rates, the divorce rates. It becomes an all-consuming occupation. Your family takes a back seat, and it's also, you know, similar to a high-interest credit card that you're only paying the minimum on. You absolutely rely on overtime and hazard pay to make ends meet. And then you want to enjoy the times when you're not on assignment. So you end up, you know, maybe going into debt, or you build up those coffers so you can spend them all. And then you're reliant on getting back out to that next fire season. And for me, it was manifesting itself into seasonal depression and anxiety during the off season.
And so there's clearly, you know, as you just described, a huge mental toll, and that's reflected in the data that you gave. Can you talk a little bit about the physical toll? You know, under the current system, we talked about how you have to get out there kind of no matter what, even if you're hurt. Are you able to get care once you are done, once you're not fighting, once the season is over, once you get out?
It depends on the nature of the injury. I would say yes. You know, I was afforded very good health insurance and vision and dental as a permanent seasonal and a permanent full-time employee. But it depends on the nature of the injury. It's oftentimes covered for the initial mechanism of injury. Let's say you were hit with a snag and you had a broken collarbone, a concussion. But then the continuing coverage can be a battle that provides enormous stress on injured first responders and then their families and coworkers if parts of those issues or injuries weren't directly tied to the initial injury.
And what happens to temporary seasonal firefighters? How does their experience compare?
Well, I mean, their health insurance, you know, thankfully they can get health insurance at the start of every fire season, and that's part of most onboarding procedures now. They can get health insurance based off of life-changing events, so they have the same health insurance that the permanent employees have, to where the federal government covers 72%. They pay for 28% on GS 3, 4, and 5 wages. But once they're in the off season, they either have to drop it or they're on the hook for 100% of that health insurance. So typically we'll have people, or I would have people sign up for health insurance, and then they have 30 days after the season to go see a doctor, get their dental and or vision needs taken care of before they drop it, so they're not on the hook for 100% of it. And then if it's a work-related injury, it just depends. If they have the private health insurance, I would recommend that they use it for stuff like the camp crud or poison oak, poison ivy. But they're in that similar battle as far as getting OWCP coverage after that initial treatment a lot of times.
Thank you very much. You know, getting treatment for work-related illnesses and injuries shouldn't be harder than fighting the actual fire, the actual forest fire, but sadly that seems to be the case. I'm going to yield back now, and I will recognize Ranking Member Fulcher for his questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And before I begin with my questions, I would like to just thank Chairman Neguse for agreeing to the majority's request, which was to have a second panel of witnesses. And I know the initial intent there was to just do administration witnesses, but he made that provision, and just very thankful for that, and want to make sure that's publicly acknowledged. With that, I have a question for Ms. Martin. Ms. Martin, I understand you're from Idaho. Welcome, glad you're here. We need more Idahoans here, so just want you to know they appreciate that. Ms. Martin, in my opening statement, I mentioned a fire in Colorado where the firefighter felt safe sending his people in only after he learned that treatments had been done in that area. And you've got a lot of experience here, so can you please talk about the need to send firefighters into what's identified as a winnable situation for us, please, and how those treatments can affect deployments of firefighters?
Thank you very much, Congressman Fulcher, and I'm proud to be in your district and proud to represent Idaho, so I'm very pleased to be here. Yes, throughout my 35 years, certainly both in wildfire suppression and doing prescribed fire, doing fuel removal, fuel reduction, without a doubt, this adds benefit to the protection of firefighters who are asked to go into these areas and protect life and property. It's clearly that these treatments in some areas have had a major effect. We're spending millions of dollars in these communities to do fuels treatment and fuels reduction. And time again, you will hear firefighters say that they feel safer going in there and protecting life and property when these effective fuel treatments have been done on the land. You know, I'd also like to kind of respond to the, backfire and burnout operations. And in my experiences, when that's done appropriately in the right place at the right time, that can be a very, very effective suppression technique. So not all the time, when we fire off of a road or a trail or something that's defendable where the firefighters feel that they're on the high ground and safe ground, it could be even a fuels treatment, a previous fuels treatment that we apply fire to, at night as this fire is, the backfire is, and the burnout operation is moving down the hill. So these are very, very effective tools that we're very familiar with, and I'm fully supportive of these treatments.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. I appreciate your candid comments there. And I've got a question for Mr. Diaz, please. Mr. Diaz, in your testimony, you mentioned that Chief Randy Moore, during his time as a regional forester in the Pacific Southwest region in California, declared in 2011 that the Forest Service must target at least 500,000 acres per year for fuel hazard reduction. But unfortunately, the Forest Service has consistently come under that number and treating barely half of that goal in each of the last 5 years. Can you describe from your perspective what the main obstacles are that consistently prevent the Forest Service from meeting their hazardous fuel reduction goals, and what can be done to ramp up the pace and scale of that?
Well, it appears to me, now to be clear, I don't work for the Forest Service. We're cooperating with the Forest Service on a lot of these projects, but it appears to me that some of the challenges might come from the environmental analysis, and that's required to be conducted on federal lands, and the interplay of the national, the NEPA, if you will, and the interplay of NEPA and the California equivalent, which is the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. So there are challenges that definitely arise as it relates to that, without a doubt. There are opportunities where, as previously mentioned, categorical exclusions do exist, but are narrowly used, it appears. So that would be the main hindrance, I believe, at this particular time.
And I just want to thank you for that and for acknowledging it. Therein lies a lot of where our efforts need to be moving forward in the future. And I just want to put that on the record as well. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fulcher. The chair would now recognize the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. I just took a bite, Katie. 1 second. I apologize, everyone. It's funny. I was just going to text you. I apologize to all the panelists. I just, I really appreciate this committee hearing because, there was an alarming story this week in The Guardian that detailed how wildland firefighters struggle with homelessness. And it really struck me. The story described how people were, how the people we are counting on to fight wildfires and protect huge pieces of our country make poverty, wages, and can't afford rent housing while, out in the field. And so, as people know, I'm a social worker at heart, and coming from the community I represent, I just think it's a scandal, really, that our wildland firefighters are living out of their cars because they're so poorly paid and provided for. And I can't think of a better way to increase wildfires than running every firefighter out of the Forest Service by paying them poverty wages as they put their lives on the line. So, Ms. Ms. Martin, what types of housing options are typically available for those serving in permanent or seasonal firefighting positions? And what are some of the options for those unable to secure affordable housing?
Thank you for that question. I really think that this is becoming a real significant issue for retaining wildland firefighters because of the low wages and low pay. In some areas, we do have barracks, and those barracks are still charged. The firefighters are still charged a rate for those barracks, and we're really recommending in this bill there is a housing stipend that we would like to see supported, especially when firefighters have to move from their permanent home. If they're paying a mortgage, they should have a stipend paid to them that would help offset housing costs in the areas where they're going to work. So we're highly supportive of that, and I think that's one area that we can be very supportive to the wildland firefighters.
Yeah, I think the stipend is really important, and it's primarily because, I even read that wildlife, employees have to frequently camp in the field while on assignment, and even if in some cases it's just better to do that, I still feel like we need to, again, provide for, and again, I think a stipend is a great option. Ms. Martin, how do federal wildland firefighter wages currently compare to non-federal wages in similar positions? And I apologize if you answered this question before.
I'll just see if I captured this right. How are they comparable to other fire service agencies?
So how does wildland firefighter wages currently compare to what I consider non-federal wages in similar positions?
So generally speaking, this isn't true, across the board for every fire, but for every large fire that you see out there, that big smoke column, there's thousands of firefighters out there. A lot of them mostly federal, but we also have state and municipal fire department employees working side by side with us. We are often the lowest paid people on the fire line in terms of working next to some of our state partners and some of the municipal firefighters as well. So what we're asking for is at least a review of the pay parity in terms of raising those wages and benefits that we see on the wildland, out on the wildland, on these wildland fires. So it's a very, very important tool that I think we have for our agencies as well as congressionals to really look at what we can do and work with the Office of Personnel Management to not only increase the wages, but also look at a classification unique to wildland firefighters. That will definitely help with bringing parity up to an acceptable level.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ms. Martin, and thank you for bringing this to our attention, to the committee chair and others. As this girl from Detroit, I just want you to know you have an ally when it comes to this issue. I'm really just striked me as something that we just have to move with a sense of urgency. So again, I appreciate us having this hearing, and thank you again, Ms. Martin, for your answers, and I yield.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tlaib. The chair will now call on Mr. Gomert, the gentleman from Texas. Are you on and able to question? Okay, we will now go ahead and instead recognize Mr. Moore, the gentleman from Utah, for his questioning.
Thank you, and I'm ready to go. Again, knowing that I could come up sooner.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moore.
My questions are for Mr. Diaz today. The first one is a little bit near and dear to my heart, because I think it was the first bill that we introduced, the Forest Tech Improvement Act. And we don't need to talk specifics about that. I'll just talk about the use of technology and how to go about, combating some of these issues that we're facing. I do appreciate the specific examples you shared about firefighting tactics and how they need to evolve. How is technology, such as remote sensing, GIS, even use of drones, which was what our legislation was focused on, changing the way we fight fires. Do you foresee these technologies in improving fire safety? I'll kind of let you address both of those sort of questions. How are they evolving? Can they be used to help with safety?
Well, in terms of, and thank you for the question. In terms of how are they evolving, I think that the technology in this field is evolving as technology in all fields or industries are, and that's rapidly. I know in California, we do have models for predictability. We have models for weather patterns. We have remote sensing and GIS capabilities that are able to be relied on for predictability. So it appears to me that a lot of the information or a lot of the technology innovation is looking at fire prediction, and then when a fire does start, where it's going to go, so that we can get on it quicker and extinguish it faster, potentially. Drone capabilities are certainly being used in different fields as well. That would be anywhere from capturing fire line, like where fire lines need to be installed, if you will, and maintained, to the use of drones for the implementation of, in the prevention field, even prescribed fire. So the innovation is happening extraordinarily quickly. And we in California, particularly Cal Fire, has been pushing a lot of energy into adopting and relying upon new fields of technology in fire protection as a whole.
Specifically, any of this new technology to fuels treatments or more active forest management? You've already sort of.
Well, in the field of prevention, in terms of equipment, the type of equipment that could be relied upon, slopes in which it could operate, size of material that it could remove, the amount of material that can be removed. There's innovations in that field as well. Most of them focusing on trying to remove individuals from the woods, because fire prevention activities or timber harvesting in general is known to be a fairly dangerous field. And so a lot of the innovations are looking at trying to reduce worker exposure and maintain levels of safety while actually completing more work on the ground.
Thanks. I wish everybody could have seen what I saw when the Summit County fire. Summit County is where Park City is. We had a fire in Summit County this summer. It flared up quickly, and it was off of a dragged chain or a spark plug or something off the freeway. And our teams were amazing. And everybody came together, right? And that's the point of my next question. Is there an open information sharing process for land managers in other states to share best practices for wildfire for prevention and mitigation? What comes off the top of your head for that ability to share this best practices?
Well, Congressman, I can only speak to California because I'm immersed in California, but I can tell you that Cal Forests has engaged in an MOU with the Forest Service as well as Cal Fire. That's focused solely on information sharing to a certain extent, trying to get information out as it relates to location and condition of infrastructure that could be relied upon, not only for prevention activities, but in the event of a suppression effort, knowing where water sources are, knowing where roads are, knowing what those conditions are, knowing what fuel types are. So information sharing in California and amongst Cal Forest members with the fire protection forces is a key piece to our success.
Excellent. Any quick thoughts on just lessons we can learn from private landowners that can be applied to federal government, given the fact that such a high percentage of fires are on federal land?
Well, we're short on time here, Congressman, but I would suggest that the Cal Forest members have some of the best and well-managed forests in California. We have a professional cohort that can assist in getting the right silvicultural prescriptions in place. And we want to continue to partner with all of our federal partners and state partners to promote a higher level of success in getting these treatments done across all ownerships in California.
Yeah, those shared stewardship are the number one things that I see. I will yield back the time I do not have, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. And I believe Mr. Neguse is able to take over again as chair.
I thank the gentlewoman from California for her indulgence and assistance during the course of this hearing, as we have competing multiple hearings scheduled for all the different members. I will recognize Mr. Obernolte for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with Ms. Martin. Thank you very much for your 35 years of service. Certainly my constituents thank you, particularly the ones that live in my own hometown. That's one of the few cities completely surrounded by national forest. We certainly appreciate your efforts. I'm going to bring up something very topical here. So we have a vaccine mandate that's going to affect our federal workforce. And just in the next few weeks, my understanding is that all of our federally employed wildfire fighters are going to either suffer consequences or termination if they cannot produce proof of vaccination. I am pro-vaccine, but I'm anti-mandate. I believe that we should be able to, I believe the vaccine is appropriate for most people, but I believe that everyone should have the ability to decide for themselves whether or not that's true. I'm wondering, I have a big concern about this because I think that it's going to really hamper our efforts over the next 12 months to fight wildfires, because I fear that we might lose a substantial portion of our federal firefighting workforce. Do you share those concerns, and how do your colleagues feel about that mandate?
Thank you for your question. I think Ms. Hall Rivera also addressed that, that they are also concerned or interested in that as well. I can't really tell you, we in grassroots wildland firefighters really haven't heard the alarm, if you will, that there's a lot of wildland firefighters that don't want to take the vaccine. What we are hearing, though, is that there are people that are concerned that if they are in a work group where someone is not vaccinated, they may end up getting sick, and then that whole entire crew is quarantined. They are not allowed to go to be deployed on fire assignments. So you have to look at it both ways, that, those that don't take it and get sick and then spread that to their crew or to their organization also has a serious impact on our response capability.
Sure, yeah, and I think we're having that same debate in our military readiness because there are people on both sides of that particular issue. Well, thank you for that candid response. My second question for Mr. Diaz. We recently received a letter from over 15 environmental organizations in California, including the Defenders of Wildlife and the Nature Conservancy, that supported more active forest management in your state. And I'll submit that letter for the record, but in that letter they said, and I'll quote, "Our organizations support increasing the pace and scale of ecologically based forest management, such as prescribed burning and thinning of surface and ladder fuels in the national forests within California." So to me, this is kind of a watershed moment, because I think we're all finally coalescing around the fact that we need to take a more active role in managing the forest, particularly in fuels reduction. And if you'd followed my questioning for the first panel, I'm very concerned about wilderness area designations, reducing our ability to do that. In light of these environmental organizations recognizing this need for management, what would you say to the environmental groups that remain, that are continuing to deny this science? Are they actually harming our firefighters and our ability to prevent these wildfires?
Without objection. Witness, may proceed.
Thank you again, Congressman. So, as I indicated early on, we are faced with a full-on crisis here. And I think that crisis is recognized by many groups out there. And CalForest and our members work very, very closely and often with all the conservation groups in California to try to promote fire prevention activities. Now, we prefer to rely upon the body of evidence, the whole body of evidence, to support our position, as well as some of the organizations that you mentioned, to support their position as it relates to promoting fire prevention activities within California. In terms of risk, that's difficult to ascertain if the alternative stance is putting folks at risk, but I would tend to agree that, and I think it's well documented, that all tools in the toolbox need to be recognized, from prescribed burning to commercial operations at times to engage in prevention activities and to reduce the risk not only to wildland firefighters, but to communities, to the habitat for our species conservation, to our waters of the state.
And sorry to
While
interrupt,
it's
just
difficult
with the
to point
remaining couple
fingers-
seconds here, what about wilderness designation? In your opinion, does that hamper our ability to do fuels reduction?
It does. Wilderness designation does tend to hamper, it does hamper the ability to promote and use fire prevention activities as it relates to fuel hazard reduction.
I share
Gentleman's
that
time has
concern.
expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The chair now recognizes Ms. Cheney for 5 minutes, and the chair thanks her for her leadership with respect to this issue. I believe we have her. And we can see you, Ms. Cheney, but you may be muted. All right.
How's that, Mr. Chairman? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Ms. Cheney. You may proceed.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee. I'm really grateful. I don't have questions. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm very grateful to the committee and to you, Mr. Chairman, for taking up this important legislation. And I know Michelle Hart is there, Tim Hart's widow, and we all recognize the critical role that our wildland firefighters play in helping us deal with the fires that the committee's been discussing this morning as they've raged all across the West, and making sure that we're in a position where we are providing the kind of resources our wildland firefighters need, the kind of benefits they need, and the kind of commitment they need through adequate pay and salary to make sure that we recognize the real danger that they face and the sacrifices that they make to keep us safe. And I'm proud that this has been a bipartisan bill, and I am hopeful that we'll be able to move it quickly through committee and to ensure that we get it across the floor over in the Senate as well and to the president's desk for signature, so we can both remember the sacrifice of our wildland firefighters like Tim Hart and also make sure that we're continuing to provide the resources they need. So with that, I'd like to just thank the chairman and yield back and thank the committee.
Gentlewoman yields back. Thank you, Ms. Cheney, for your leadership and your partnership. It has certainly been a pleasure and a privilege to work with you on this particular bill, and I'm very grateful for that partnership and share your commitment to getting this across the finish line. And with that, I'll go ahead and recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. And I first just want to, I think it's important to reset with respect to forest management, because we have heard quite a bit during the course of this hearing and other hearings about forest management. The letter Mr. Obernolte submitted for the record, I would say I'm glad. I appreciate you submitting this letter to the record. This is a letter from a wide variety of environmental groups in California, I suppose, to the California delegation. And in it, they ask for, I'll just quote, "Our groups collectively share our desire for the Forest Service and other relevant federal agencies to rapidly increase the pace and scale of science-based forest treatments in order to move away from inadequate management that isn't solving the crisis." I think Mr. Obernolte agrees with that sentiment, I take. The next sentence, specifically, "We support funding and prioritization of forest restoration programs and activities such as those proposed in the 21st Century Conservation Corps Act," the CCC bill. That is my legislation. That is part of the Build Back Better proposal that the Congress is currently considering. And I guess I offer that just because essentially these groups are saying we ought to make the investments that I have proposed and many of my other colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle have proposed with respect to forest management and fuels treatment. And I would hope that my colleagues would support these measures when they come to the floor. I'll just, Mr. Diaz, if you might indulge me, I'll touch on this a bit further. I think you've testified to this, that you believe thinning is important and that prescribed fire and fuel breaks, that those are all important. Is that a correct assessment of your view?
That's a correct assessment. I think all tools in the toolbox need to be present to combat the issues we're facing.
And Mr. Diaz, are you aware that in the bipartisan infrastructure deal that the House will vote on in short order, that it includes $500 million for prescribed fires? Were you aware of that?
I am aware of that to a certain extent, and I'm also aware that California has invested about 1.5 billion this year in fire prevention activities as well. So we're looking to leverage those funds across all landscapes in California.
That's good to hear. And are you aware that there's $500 million for thinning in the bipartisan infrastructure deal? Are you aware of that?
I have heard of that as well, Congressman.
Well, I'm glad you've heard of that, Mr. Diaz, and I guess I would just offer a friendly word of encouragement to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, whom I respect, that I hope they've heard of this too, and I hope they take a look at the bipartisan infrastructure deal and the Build Back Better deal, because I think if they do, they will find that there are incredible investments in forest management, alongside the signs that the minority has brought here today to the hearing. I just think it's important, because I hear a lot from my colleagues about forest management, and we finally have an opportunity to make these investments. What an incredible opportunity that is. And I look forward to my colleagues voting in a bipartisan, perhaps unanimous fashion for those investments when they come to the floor. I, of course, want to focus on the central thrust of today's hearing, which is the important firefighting compensation pieces of legislation that we have before us, Ms. Lofgren's bill from California, and of course, Tim's Act. And I think we've heard from the stakeholders and from the administration that there is broad consensus that we are pushing our firefighters to the brink. And it strikes me that on an issue like this, where we have Republican and Democratic support from stakeholders, support from the administration, I can't seem to find anyone who opposes it, that we could get this done. And as Representative Cheney so eloquently put it, I could think of no better way to honor the sacrifices of our federal wildland firefighters, and in particular, those of the individuals that we've lost, like Tim Hart, than to get this done and to ensure that our federal firefighters actually have the resources that they need to be able to do the life-saving work that they are doing for our communities each and every day. Cameron Peak Fire was mentioned by my friend from Idaho. Last year, 2 biggest wildfires in the history of Colorado, 137 years, the biggest wildfires in the history of our state, both happened, raging simultaneously in my congressional district. From Grand Lake to Estes Park, from Granby to the Calwood and Left Hand Canyon fires in Boulder County, we relied on federal wildland firefighters to protect us. And they did their job. It's time we do our job, which means passing this legislation, putting in place the compensation increases, the housing guarantees, and the benefits increases that folks like Michelle and many, many others with the Grassroots Wildland Firefighters Organization and so many others have been fighting for, not just for months, but for years, and in fact, in some cases, decades. So I look forward to getting this done. With that, we will close the question portion of today's hearing. And I believe that the ranking member, my friend from Idaho, would like an opportunity to offer a closing statement, and happy to give him that opportunity. Mr. Fulcher, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your efforts. Your comments are duly noted, and so are your efforts. Thank you for that. There is no question that compensation is important. It's a critical part of any job, and not denying that in any way, shape, or form. I just don't want to lose sight that the root problem that we're dealing with here on the ground is fuel load. And regardless of your position on climate change, fuel load has to be dealt with. And that's why we bring it up so much. And we can continue to take other approaches. We can continue to bring up other things, but that's just where this comes down. It's fuel load, and the problem is going to persist for catastrophic wildfire unless we do that. And I also want to just underscore before I close out my statement that a vaccine mandate is not going to help any. In fact, it's going to hurt, and we need to prepare for that. We need to prepare for a shortage of workers across the board if the administration goes forward with this. And sometimes these things astound me as to how we make these decisions knowing it's going to have a negative long-term effect that is far-reaching. And so, Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back and thank you for the closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Fulcher, for your participation in today's hearing, and I certainly appreciate the kind words, and I do think this is an area, I won't make necessarily a elongated closing statement. I think you've had an opportunity to address the body a couple of times here this morning and this afternoon now, but I would simply say I think that this is an area where there is bipartisan agreement and we should be able to get it done. And I also would say that forest management and adequately compensating our firefighters are not mutually exclusive concepts. We can do both. And we have done both in this committee. It's why we held a hearing on July 13th in this very committee. I made it a priority of mine to ensure that we had a hearing on forest management. We heard 3 bills, Mr. Panetta's bill, Ms. Schreier's bill, my Joint Chief Landscape bills, all bipartisan bills directed towards forest management. And it's why we're having the hearing we are today on firefighter compensation. I think we can do both. I think we must do both. And I would encourage all of us to get to it, and let's make this a reality. So with that, without objection, I'd like to submit for the record 2 items. One, a statement from the National Federation of Federal Employees representing roughly 10,000 federal wildland firefighters in support of the legislation that's being considered today. And secondly, a letter to House and Senate leadership signed by Chairman Grijalva, other members, including myself, supporting the wildfire provisions included in the continuing resolution, which was signed into law on September 30th. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony. I thank the members for their thoughtful questions. And the members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, I think in particular the administration witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, subparagraph O, members of this committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for those responses. If there is no further business, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.